only fair I tell you a little bit about it as an overview before I dig into my very serious criticisms of it. This is Arrows of Rain, a first novel written by Okey Ndibe, a Nigerian novelist who has been living and working in Connecticut for quite some time. It is a novel that is about trading testimonies. It opens in the West African nation of Medea, a fictional country that bears some striking resemblances to the author's native Nigeria. And we are in late 1980s on New Year's Day when a prostitute washes up on a beach. She has been recently raped and drowned. Now we are in the voice here with a Median journalist named Femi who happened to be on the beach to write some kind of New Year's Day fluff piece when this drama unfolds. The person arrested for the young woman's death is Bukuru, a vagrant who's been living on the beach for about 20 years, and it quickly appears to us that Bukuru is more of a political prisoner than anything else. So he's not arrested until after he identifies officers of the dictatorial government of Medea as being responsible for this woman's death, as well as a series of other corpses that have been found on the beach. Now, Bukuru finds in Femi somebody he wants to give testimony to, and the great bulk of the novel is effectively Bukuru's letter to Femi that tells him his whole story, how he came to be where he is, what he saw that makes him so certain of his accusations of government officials, and his own reasons for feeling guilt and shame about the past. At the very end, we return to Femi's voice for a somewhat abrupt conclusion that brings this drama to an end. The other prominent voice in the novel is that of Ais, who is somebody Bukuru had dated in the 1960s, in the years before the coup in Medea that put the dictator in power. She herself is a young prostitute, and Bukuru himself is a journalist, and Bukuru interviews Ais and gives her reason to share her testimony with him, and so we get prominently her voice as well, telling how she came to be where she is, what she's seen, what she's experienced, and so on. Now, here's my problems with it. Problem number one, the whole structure of the novel. This set of flashback piled on flashback screamed to me of a weak structure that was sort of an attempt to bring texture to the book, but in effect completely threw off the pace. Given that almost the entire book is in Bukuru's voice and telling his story chronologically in the form of a letter to Femi, gives the frame of the novel of Femi the flavor of being a mere device. It feels like the author was particularly interested in Bukuru but wasn't sure how to get his story across, and so merely gave this setup of a confession basically as an excuse to tell his whole story, and in a strictly linear fashion. First this happened, then this happened, then this happened. My frustration with this was exacerbated when Ais' story occurs within Bukuru's story in the exact same fashion. You know, he interviews her and gives her an excuse for her to say, here's my whole story, you know, here's what happened, and then this what happened, and this happened, and this happened. The unbelievability of this structure is added by the fact that within all these flashbacks are a series of apparently remembered word-for-word letters that appear within the flashbacks that just stretch the limitations of suspended belief here. I feel a little bit of empathy for Ndibe as a first-time novelist, you know, struggling to find a way to tell this particular story, but it is, in effect, as a reader, completely deflating. The structure undercuts the whole story and makes the story feel false. It makes it feel false, you know? It just this setup of journalists who sit back and receive each other's stories just completely undercuts the tension that might have existed in this novel. Yeah, I mean, there's that. I felt angry about that because it felt like a wasted opportunity, and it felt like a trick that was pulled on me as a reader again and again and again throughout the book. The second big problem I had with the book was the overinflated symbiology that was put on a lot of these characters, right? You know, the two journalists, Femi and Bukuru, echo each other, but more to the point of my frustration is the female characters. All the female characters are of types. They're complete types. There is the brutalized / murdered prostitute, who we see appear in the form of, I don't know, 5 different characters, some with names, some without. Or we see the woman as a wise grandmother. This felt patently ridiculous. This felt incredibly limiting. I feel like Ndibe tried to bring some 3-dimensionality to the character of Ais, the young prostitute who we get to know the most well. And the way he tried to do this is identifying her as a former teacher, somebody who knows Shakespeare. She's able to quote Shakespeare, you know, on our first meeting with Bukuru. Now, this felt like a very amateurish attempt at giving her 3-dimensionality, because that is sort of a telling detail that's thrown in that bears no weight upon the story. Effectively, that background of Ais only shapes her character in as much as that she does not speak in pidgin. And I suppose it's also supposed to give us, more sympathy for her. She's not just a prostitute. She knew stuff. What her story is all the more tragic because she used to teach Shakespeare. Even when she goes through her whole biography, how she got to be where she is, what happened, her story when, Bukuru interviews her, we never even get an explanation for why she gave up teaching. The story kind of ends when a previous marriage of hers ends and she moves to another town, and then the interview between the two of them is interrupted. We never find out why, when she moved to another town, she didn't teach and instead took to having sex for money. We never actually get that story. So I felt immensely frustrated with the portrayal of female characters in this book, because it felt like what was put upon them was the weight of tragedy. On one hand, they're all melancholy / brutalized prostitutes, and therefore are supposed to sort of bear the stakes of the crimes of both, individual characters and the larger system that they're operating in. They are merely bodies to be brutalized. Or they are like at least 2 different women, well, 3 actually in the book. They are the wise grandmother type who are only there to, be asexual, pseudo-spiritual truth tellers. And that's it. That's it. And especially given that there is no counter to those kind of types that are portrayed in this book, especially because these types didn't appear just once, but were echoed several times in various forms throughout the book, it was just maddening. So, yeah, these are my 2 really big frustrations. That's why I had to put down the book for 2 weeks to take a break, because I was getting too angry at it. And here's the other thing too, if this book had nothing good about it, I would not have gotten angry. The reason I felt truly angry is because there is a lot of good content to this book. There is some really compelling details. One of the most interesting parts of the book is in Ais's biography, the person she first married is this Marxist doctor who is trying to live by his values in a village and encounters unforeseen internal challenges when he is moved from his position into a city. Fascinating character, really interesting. And likewise, I'm very interested in what Ndibe's trying to do with this unresolved sense of shame and guilt and when to speak and when to keep silent. It's really interesting. Some of the humor in the book is fascinating, given that there's so many grim narrative threads moving through this book, but so much of it is wasted. It is wasted by taking some interesting material, packaging it in a completely deflating structure that is marked, no less, by the implication of a completely improbable coincidence at the very end, and also by using female characters in the book in completely stereotypical fashion that made this feel less like a novel and more like a message. So it pains me to say all that. I have to say I'm actually cautiously interested in what Ndibe is going to do with his second book, which I understand he's working on, because I do feel like he has talent. He needs to mature in the sense of how to put books together and how to imagine characters before I'm going to be his fan.